Thank you for tuning into the Movie Pope podcast. And today we are continuing with our review of horror movies for the month of October. So, over the past few weeks, we've been looking at movies within the horror genre of different varieties. So, beginning of the month, we looked at Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice is part of our gothic fantasy look. And then we looked at Sinners as part of the magical realism slash vampire flick. And today we are taking a look at Weapons, which isn't about weapons at all, but is about a witch. But before we dive in, remember to like, comment, subscribe. We're slowly growing our audience, and we have a lot of shows on the channel. So be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're missing us and you want to dig back into the archives to see what we've discussed in the past, we do have everything arranged into playlists, so it's easy for you to take a look at. And as always, thanks for tuning in. Let's go and dive in. So, Weapons is one of those movies that I never really put much thought into because we did a trailer reaction a few months ago, but I didn't think that much of it. I thought it was going to be more of like Mystic River or Gone Girl, really. I didn't think it was going to go the direction that it went down eventually. But what was it about this movie that you decided, maybe we should take a look at this instead? Because originally we were going to look at Prey, which was a Predator movie set in the Native American times, but you convinced me to go with Weapons instead. So what was it about this movie that made you decide let's give this a go instead?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because like I said, I did enjoy Prey, so I guess a little bit of a I guess I did enjoy that, but I guess for me, I'm thinking about kind of this time frame, right? We're thinking about more horror related stuff, and I felt like this one kind of got more into that horror realm, right? And the other thing that happened was there's a lot of really positive word of mouth about this, right? And I know we've talked in the past, like I'm not a huge fan of like stuff like The Conjuring and everything like that. So I felt like this was kind of maybe the closest I would be willing to like review something that's more on the, I guess, direct horror side. But I like how it had different elements involved with it, right? Like there's this huge air of mystery around it. And I would suggest for anyone that's curious about watching it, go into it blind, right? I know if you're listening to this review, that's not going to help you at all as we go through it. But I went into it totally blind, and it was really interesting to see how everything unraveled. And I would say even on like further review, it was even more fun seeing it again because you start to see how all these pieces fit in better. So I had a lot of fun with it, but yeah, I think the big thing for me was this felt a lot more horror related than other things that were out there that we were talking.
Now, did you actually see this in theaters, or did you watch it when it came out on streaming? What was going on there?
I definitely watched it for streaming. I think, actually, I had suggested it to you, right? But I had not seen it yet. But, like I said earlier, there's a whole lot of positive word of mouth around it. So I was like, you know what? I feel pretty confident. Let's check this out. But yeah, I will admit that I had no idea when I suggested it, what this was going to be about or what we would be discussing. So at least for me, I'm glad I gave it a shot. I will say.
Well, what was surprising too is the fact that this isn't like the past two movies that we've reviewed over the past 2 weeks, right? Because Beetlejuice, and Sinners, they were both. I mean, would you say like an hour and 45, give or take?
Mm-hmm.
This one is a good 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours. So it's quite an investment of time when you're watching this. I mean, did you find it difficult trying to follow along, given it's pretty lengthy runtime, or did it kind of just go by pretty quickly for you because you were so engaged in what was happening?
Yeah, I think there are some aspects of it, right, that they probably would have done a little bit without. And when we talk about it, right, there's going to be some, I guess, character arcs that we just kind of ignore because I didn't feel like they're overly critical to the story. So I do think there was an opportunity there for them to maybe change things up, especially because as you sprinkle in information throughout the film, you start to see like, I see this one character experiencing something, and then you go to a different character's POV, and it's like, oh, dang, I really want to see what happens to that character.
It's basically Rashomon is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because it was just like I was like, oh dang, like I saw what happened with Marcus, and I'm like, oh gosh, I need to see Marcus's thing. So I see Marcus's title card pop up. I'm like, oh, here we go. We know shit's about to hit the fan now. But yeah, I think that's kind of both to its detriment and to its positive. Is just that you have an opportunity there, and it's not always, I would say, going at the pace I would like it to see.
Well, another thing too is the name itself, because the name and the content of the movie, you would want to say that the name is a misnomer because it's called Weapons,
Yeah,
and yet by the time you finish the movie, you just sit there and scratch your head,
yeah,
like me, and just wonder, well, how is exactly does it relate to weapons? I mean, is it a metaphor? Is it literal, or what? And that was something that we kind of asked ourselves too when we did the trailer reaction. Did it become a lot more clear to you when you watched this movie, or were you left a
nope.
bit more befuddled?
Nope, I am just as lost as you are with that. I know that Archer, right, that's played by Josh Brolin, he kind of mentions like the kids just kind of like act like a bunch of like weapons or they're tactical. So like he has a very loose, I guess, kind of way of talking about it. But yeah, I didn't feel at the end. I was like, huh, you know what? I don't really know why they went with that, but I think with you, I think a lot of it was maybe just to not give away the type of movie that it is. And
Right.
I don't know how good of a marketing strategy it was to do that, but it sure got me full when I was
Yeah.
watching it.
So Lee, without further ado, because we've bandied on for quite a bit, why don't you go ahead and take us into weapons?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we kind of start off right. We get this exposition from a kid, right? And I couldn't tell. Did you pick up that was Alex that was narrating it, or is it just some rando kid? I couldn't pick up on it. I assumed it was Alex. It would make sense for it to be Alex, but then I don't know. I
Yeah,
wasn't really
I mean, near the end of the movie, the kid talks about how Alex went to go live with another aunt.
exactly.
So I'm like, well, if it's Alex, at that age, kids normally don't refer themselves in the third
Exactly.
person.
Exactly.
I tried to do that once, and I got called to the principal's office, and they're saying, "Luka, are you okay?" It's like, yes, I'm fine. I saw someone do it on TV, and I just wanted to do that. And they're like, okay, well, don't do that again, you fucking weirdo. And
Yeah.
you know,
Weird, man, weird. But yeah, it was just kind of like weird. But I get it. Like a lot of it, obviously deals with the kids. So sure, you have.
but I mean, it's kind of it's really of a non-issue, really, because it kind of because just by having a kid narrate, it kind of lets you know, like, this isn't gonna. I mean, it's not going to be done conventionally, right? It's not going to be an adult
Absolutely.
explaining how things are viewed from their point of view, but from how a kid is viewing it, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like, if you because you remember back in school we had to read To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
They're talking about how Harper Lee wanted the story told from Scout's point of view because it offered us a more different perspective on the events that transpired in that town, and you kind of get the same feeling here, where by a kid offering exposition, it offers a far more different, unique look and it kind of sets you up on what your expectations are compared to what an adult might view these events.
Yeah. No,
Because kids for the most part, they're going to be more open to things that are unconventional. I mean, at that age, kids have imaginary friends. They're more inclined to believe in the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus than an adult who will say, "Oh, well, it's just some crazy nut job who's breaking into people's homes and taking shit."
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think that does, I think, play a part in this, right? Because we get kind of the exposition, and we find out that, and really they tell you up front, kind of the starting event that sparks everything, right? So, on some day, right at 2:17 a.m., a bunch of kids just start leaving their house, right? And they all look like a bunch of like, airplanes, right? They're all running around with their arms spread out, kind of like doing, I don't know, a kind of similar Naruto pose, I guess. But they end up leaving all their homes, all except for a single student, right? Alex, right? So Alex is the only one of the kids that I guess did not do this, right? And the story kind of goes out from there, where we focus on individual characters, right? And I thought that was a very interesting storytelling device. And I was curious, right? I want to get your perspective, right? Did you like how they broke up the story, where we follow like certain characters' point of views throughout the story, and it's kind of we move into different characters?
Well, it did feel a bit frustrating at times because it feels like, you start with the teacher's perspective, right? And then when you go to the parents' perspective, it kind of resets. It kind of goes back to, the PTA meeting where everybody's just yelling, but then it goes back, and it kind of jumps around a little bit, and it's a bit frustrating at first if you don't know what's going on. But by the time you get to the middle of the movie, everything starts to make sense because it's filling in the gaps of what
Yes.
you're not seeing. So in my mind, and I don't know if this is something that you did, but in my mind, I was playing it sort of like if these people were giving a testimony, right? So if they're in a courtroom and they're telling their side of the story, obviously, Archer's not going to be able to tell the story about what's going on with the teacher because he's not the teacher. Just like Marcus wouldn't be able to talk about what Archer was doing because he's at school all day. He's not going to be at a construction site, forgetting to order a specific color paint for, a house that they're building, right? So I sort of frame it that way, and I don't know if that was the intent, but that's the best way that I could frame it in order to make sure that I understood what was going on, right?
Yeah.
Because as you're watching the movie, obviously Paul is not going to know like the full details of what the drug addict was doing, right? Because the drug addict is the one who breaks into the house and discovers what he discovers, and then he goes and gets the police officer, just as
the hero we weren't expecting.
Right, exactly. So again, I don't know if this is if that's what you did, but that's the kind of that was the strategy I went with to sort of make sure I didn't kind of lose patience because you understand that there's a story being told, but if you just expect it to be a linear story going from beginning to middle to end, the traditional 3-act story, and it doesn't necessarily play out the way that you're expecting, you can get frustrated pretty easily. So
Yeah.
by kind of framing it in such a way that where you kind of imagine the characters are giving a testimony or a report to a police officer, it makes a little bit more sense, right? But I kind of wish it was one of those things where sometimes instead of just resetting, going back to the same night or whatever, they would kind of just pick up where the last person left off, right?
Sure.
So.
Yeah. No, and I agree with you, and I would echo that, right? Because I think the other issue that I had was some characters did not have as great of importance to the story, and really it just felt like anytime they're on screen, I'm just like, can we get to like the next person, right? Because I want to see what's happening now that you kind of sprinkled some information for me. But I will say this: I'll give the writing directing team a lot of credit. It must be really challenging to like have everything plotted out the way you did and trying to see all these different things happening, right?
But I'll say this though. I will say this though, like the way they framed it, it kind of added a bit of a mystery because you didn't know who would be the next who'd be the next perspective, right? So obviously the teacher makes sense, Archer makes sense because you want to get one of the parents' perspective. I really wasn't expecting Paul's perspective.
No.
Like,
I was not expecting drug dealer James either. So
well, when you watch the drug dealer, like it makes a little bit more sense. But Paul,
of course,
yes. But with Paul, it's like, okay, well, I mean, he's a cop. I mean, I guess it's important to get a cop's perspective on this, but it just felt a little weird how they kind of, I mean, unless they were trying to do one of those slices of life kind of thing where it's like, here in this little town, we have all different sorts of people, and here are the people who live in this town. Kind of like a Mr. Rogers kind of vibe to it, but
no, I agree. So, so the first perspective that we get overall, right, is we get the teacher Justine, right? So we see her, and pretty much the events of the movie take place. I believe they say it's about a month afterwards, right? I believe that's what it was.
Yeah.
So it takes place a month afterwards, and it starts off at this school conference, and they have Justine there, and I'm just like, oh no, this sounds so tone deaf, right? Like she is the classroom teacher when there's something like 17 missing kids, and you bring her in there to kind of deal with the situation. And I thought that was ridiculous. I felt so bad for her because I'm like, God, like she's gonna get totally chewed out because even though we don't know what's going on, obviously the parents are gonna point the finger at her because it's like, well, geez, this is really weird. Why is it that your classroom's the only one impacted? So,
Yeah, but that's a natural reaction, though, if you think about it. I mean,
oh, of course, it totally makes sense. But then it's just like, gosh, I feel bad for her because she was totally set up to, I think, just sit there and have to take the blows of everyone being pissed off, right? It was their anger that was a big problem. And it totally makes sense why they'd be angry at her. But, we find out that she really had nothing to do with it.
Although they do make a point to kind of show that she does like to drink quite a lot. I mean,
that's true. Yeah.
I mean, you see how much vodka she bought at that store.
Oh yeah.
I was watching it. I was watching it and I was just thinking, I think Lee would like to party with this chick.
Dude, I couldn't keep up with this shit, man. Like she was just hitting that hard, right? So, but yeah, I mean, yeah, you see Justine, right? So she, obviously after the the failed school conference, right, where everyone just berates her, she ends up going back home before making a pit stop at a place to buy alcohol. We see that people are kind of like playing pranks on her, right? So we see that her car was vandalized. We see the word witch written on it. So obviously she's getting a lot of ire for being the teacher in this case. And not really having any answers.
I mean, this is just me being pedantic, but did they ever figure out who wrote which on her car?
Well, okay, they don't say it outright, right? But they do have Archer, right? So he has paint cans in the back of his truck, and they kind of focus on it when Archer's in front of her house.
Okay, so it was Archer then.
Yes, yeah. Well, they heavily implied it, right? So he had red paint because he had painted the door, or he had ordered the door incorrectly from the house. And then he had the paint cans in the back.
Yeah.
And then he went up to the house. So you don't see him do it, but I feel like the movie heavily implied he was the one that wrote the words on there.
Yeah, and plus one of his workers was like, yeah, we were supposed to order this can of paint, and it still hasn't shown up. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. So, and I think that was creative, right? Because it doesn't like spell it out for you; it gives you some visual clues, which I think this movie does a great job with. So for Justine, she's obviously frustrated with everything. She wants the answers just like everybody else. So she wants to really speak with Alex, right? So Alex is the one kid that did not disappear, right, from this event. But she's urged not to, right? So Marcus, another, I would say, key figure in this, right? He's the principal. He urges her not to. But for her, obviously, curiosity kills the cat, so to say, right? Because she just needs to really get that information. So she goes over to Alex's house, and you can see that, there's newspaper all over the windows. They're not able to really see in. She ends up going to the back of the house, and she kind of looks through, right, this little hole, and she just sees the parents sitting there, right? Alex's parents sitting there. And it was a pretty effective jump scare for me because I was just like, something's going to happen. And it really is just something like so nonchalant as just people sitting on a couch, right?
Well, it kind of changes the tone of the movie because, at the beginning you're expecting it's going to be something like someone lured the kids out at 2:17 and kidnapped them, and that's it. Like you would think it's a pretty conventional thriller, like what you would see with Mystic River or any of the other movies in the past. But then as soon as you see the parents, it's like, okay, like this isn't the kind of movie we were expecting.
Yes.
So now you're thinking, well, what else is going on here? You know?
Yeah. I do like how, at least for like the first half of it, right? There is a very distinct air of mystery around what happens. So I think that it does kind of create this atmosphere of unease because you don't know what's happening. And for Justine, right, so she sees the couple just sitting there, and she's obviously freaked out about it. She, kind of calls up as like, hey, something weird's going on at this house, and she's worried about Alex's safety. But she ends up just kind of continuing to stay the night. And you see once again Justine hitting the booze hard, right? And she's sitting there drinking. She ends up passing out in the car. And you have this sequence where Alex's mom stumbles out of the house, right? And you can see that she's clearly not well, right? She's, acting very odd. And she comes into the car, and you're just sitting there, like, wondering, oh, God, what she's going to do. And then you just see Alex's mom, she just cuts off some hair, right? That's all she does. She just cuts off some hair, right? And I thought that this was really interesting, especially on my repeat watch of this, right? Because the movie does a great job of creating tension. And, you see something like this, it's like, oh, that's really weird. All they did was cut off some hair. Like, is that supposed to be spooky or anything? But I like how her cutting off the hair plays a very important role later in the film. And I think that this does such a good job of foreshadowing some of the stuff that happens in future events by something that to us, when you're watching the first time, you're like, huh, that's weird. But they do a good job of incorporating that into the story later on. So what did you think about, like, when you saw something like that seems so innocent, kind of? What did you think about how it, like, plays a role later as we get to discovering more and more about what happened?
Well, I mean, they do a pretty good job at misdirection because they've already established that someone is playing a prank on Justine by vandalizing her car and writing witch. So I was just thinking someone is just doing it just to screw with her. Like,
yeah,
maybe it's like another angry parent wanting to cut off her hair and then take it to the police and say, yeah, she definitely did something to the kids because she's a wino and she's going around stalking kids and she might plan to kidnap some more,
yeah.
And then when you come to find out later what it's actually used for, it's like, oh, okay, that's a huge misdirection. But
yeah,
but they do lay the foundation and letting us know that, hey, there are some people in that town who don't like Justine, and they've already established that they are not above playing childish pranks on her because they're really pissed off at her.
Yep. Yeah.
And to be and to be fair, I mean, she's not doing herself any favors either. I mean,
No.
Because one of the parents even says, this woman's had a history of being an alcoholic and
Yep.
being irresponsible. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility for someone to kind of play a prank on her and just make her think, oh, I must have gotten really, really sloppy drunk and did something stupid.
Yep. Yeah.
Now, I don't know how stupid you have, sloppy drunk and stupid you have to be to paint witch on your own car, but it's just one of those things where it's like, it's not impossible to conceive that she, to make her think she did all these things, or she doesn't remember because she has a history of being, an alcoholic.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but yeah, after we cut off the hair, this is where we get our first kind of transition of the POV, right? So we move over from focusing on Justine to focusing on the character Archer, who's played by Josh Brolin. So Archer, he is the father of one of the missing kids, the kid named Matthew. Not important, but that's his name. And we see that he's obviously struggling with everything that's happening, because he's sleeping in his son's room, right? So you see him kind of sitting in bed. You could tell that his relationship with the wife at this stage is very strained, with everything going on. So you could tell that this is a guy that's really struggling with everything.
I mean, he took it really, really hard compared to the other parents,
Oh, of course, right? I mean, your kid's missing, right? And you have no answers. And this is over a month since the incident, and it has to be very frustrating. And yeah, I don't blame any of them for struggling to cope with their situation, right? So we kind of get a little bit about Archer, right? He, does some form of construction, right? And he ends up following Justine. And I like how now that we see his POV, we start to notice some things that Justine saw that she was very curious about. Now we see Archer's perspective and everything that was going on, right? So, when Justine is listening to the parents kind of badgering her in the background, we don't see it's actually Archer is the one that's doing it, right? So I think that was very clever that they just kind of shoot from the back and you see, oh, it's just some guy's head. And then now you see it's like, oh, that was Archer. That was the one that was doing it. Justine remembers seeing like this like weird vehicle that was outside, and then we see Archer, and it's like, oh, he was the one that was driving the vehicle. She sees the witch on the side of the car. We see, he has these cans of paint that are in the back of his truck, the same color as what was written witch on the car. So I think that was all a very clever way of kind of recapping some of what we saw and giving us a different perspective that helps us understand what's happening.
He's also got a bit of OCD if you think about it, because he's very. I mean, he's obsessive, and he and I don't know if they mentioned this, but I kind of got the feeling he was going to the police station on a regular basis too.
Oh yes. Yeah, even the police chief was like, "Hey, look, man, we're on this, right? You don't have to come here all the time. You're not the only one that's impacted."
Yeah, and I was wondering too, because the guy it sounds like the guy runs his own business, right? So you would think a guy who runs a pretty lucrative business in construction, you would be busy trying to do all these things, but he surprisingly has a lot of spare time on his hands.
Yes,
if you think about it, because he's using most of that time to stalk Justine or to dig up dirt on her past, because he's the one who mentions to the police chief that she's had a history of alcohol abuse.
Yes.
Yep. And then he spends most of his time just like, because he's also going to other parents' homes and asking, "Hey, do you have your Ring camera? Can I look at that too?" And I'm like, okay, like if I was in that situation, I would be upset too. But this is starting to get a little bit weird. Not to mention, there's a bit of an immaturity about him, because I mean, regardless of how old you are, I mean that's a pretty immature thing to go and vandalize someone's property.
Well, of course, yeah, of course, yeah, and I think I do chalk up almost everything too. I'm sure people in such a hard situation like that probably act out of character a lot. And I think for him, right, we see kind of like a lot of odd things that he does, right? So you mentioned, he's sitting there and he's like helping, he goes to these other parents' houses and he's like, kind of like putting all this stuff, and he's like trying to triangulate the direction that the kids are running, because they kind of run in a straight line out of the house, and he thinks that they're all kind of going to one specific destination. So, I think the guy does leverage some of his, construction expertise to help with that. But obviously, I'm sure a lot of the parents probably like, "Oh God, this guy is totally off his rocker talking about this." But it's, a guy that's trying to cope with the severity of his situation. We have kind of this odd dream sequence, right? And I wanted to bring this one in particular because this kind of made me really puzzled by, I guess, what they're trying to do. So Archer is sleeping, and he kind of has a dream of his kid, right, kind of running out of the house and then running back into the house. And when Archer's coming back, you see, it looks like, I think it's like, I'm not a gun person, right? So please, I apologize for anyone that's like, movie pope, that's not what that is. It looked to me like maybe an M4 or something that was up in the sky. And it had the 217, right? 217 referring to when all the kids ran out. And it was kind of like showing up on the side of the gun, like almost like kind of like an ammo counter, like similar to how like we see like in Aliens, right? They have like that ammo counter that shows like how many bullets they have. That's kind of what I envisioned with that. But it was so odd to see this like kind of automatic rifle in the sky with the 217 on there. Now I have my theory about it, right? I want to see, did you have any theories about it? Because then I'm going to put on my tinfoil hat and I'm going to talk a little bit about it from my perspective.
Well, for the sake of brevity, I'll keep it short. But
Okay.
I just assume they put it in there just to say, see, this is why we call the movie Weapons. There's a silhouette of a gun like in the sky above this kid's house.
Okay, that's fair, right? So, and like I said, I feel like I might be putting way too much thought into this, right? But here's my thing, right? So, one, we know that unfortunately there are a lot of shootings in areas that we shouldn't see shootings, right? And I'm dancing around calling it that to avoid it. But you know, that's unfortunately the reality of what we live in, right? And something that I was kind of thinking when I saw that gun in the sky, I'm thinking to myself, was this a shooting that happened at the school? And like, it's just all these people like just struggling to cope with or to deal with the reality of the situation. That's kind of where my brain was going when I saw that, because I'm like, God, that's such a weird visual to throw in. And I assumed that the visual wouldn't be there unless that had a critical part to the story. But as we move forward, well, I figured out I was very wrong. But I don't know. That's how I interpreted it. I'd be very curious how other people like looked at that, or they just saw it as just like, whatever. They just wanted to have that image out there. But
So do you think it was like a misdirection on the
oh
filmmaker's
yes,
part?
yes. In retrospect, it absolutely was, right, because I didn't really see how it tied in to anything else logically that I could come up with. So I think it was a bit of misdirection, at least for me. Which, you know, hey, it is what it is, right? It's okay to throw some red herrings out there. But I was definitely, my mind was in a very different place, because it really is a mystery for the first half until things start to unravel. So Archer, you know, obviously, you know, wakes up for the dream, and you know, he's trying to pinpoint where his kids are. So in kind of his last part of his sequence, right, we see him going to well, he's trying to go to where, you know, these kids' paths would have converged, right? Because he's trying to figure out where they're all going to. And he ends up seeing Justine pulling into a gas station, right? And he confronts her, and we see the school principal, Marcus, just charging at them like a total psychopath, right? Like he's got like blood in his face, it's like all messed up. And you know, he just starts attacking Justine, and luckily, you know, Archer's there to help like protect her. But you know, this is where it kind of, I think, the mystery starts to unravel, because it's like, God, that's so weird. Why is Marcus, who, I mean, seems to be a very well-spoken, calm demeanor, like he seemed like such a nice guy, and then now it's like, oh shit, what's going on with him?
I mean, it's a huge shift, because like up until that point, he's if not he you know, if he's not the only one, he's the biggest, you know, supporter of Justine, right?
Yes.
Because he's going out of his way to make sure that she still has her job, but she's on leave, and he tries to warn her and tell her, hey, maybe you shouldn't be at this meeting. Maybe you should just lay low for a while until everything dies down. So this is like, so he does a complete 180 when he just comes out of nowhere and starts, you know, attacking her, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very shocking. So, so yeah, so that wraps up our Archer story, and I'm just gonna kind of gloss through these next two, because to me, this is where I think if the movie would have maybe condensed some of the story aspects, I think it would have went smoother, because like you said, this is over 2 hours. And I think some of these characters, while they had some important story elements to it, I think they didn't necessarily have to be these characters that did what needed to happen. So
yeah, I mean, their contributions were pretty minimal if you think about it.
Yes, yeah.
Well, some of them were, some of them.
Yes. But so we focus on two other characters, right? So we have Paul. Paul is a police officer, right? And he used to be, or he's Justine's ex-boyfriend. So he's a cop, and he ends up kind of, I guess, on patrol, happens to notice something weird happening. He sees this alleged criminal maybe trying to break into something, and we find out that this is actually James, right? So James is a junkie, and we'll talk a little bit about his story, because he kind of has this habit of stealing things. And as he is, you know, kind of stealing stuff to feed his habit, he actually goes into Alex's house, and this is where we see or we get more information about what's happening, right? So Alex just kind of blindly stumbles into the basement of this house, or excuse me, I meant James stumbles into the basement of this house. And James realizes, oh, there's a bunch of kids down here, and he thinks it's really weird, right? He ends up, he like goes to pawn like a bunch of the silverware that they had. I guess that's always like a popular thing to pawn. I don't know. I don't have any good silverware, so if anyone tries to steal anything from me, just don't bother. I guess I'm not adult enough to have good silverware, but
we do have some pretty fancy posters and a very expensive, frame that lights up. So
that's true. That's true. Though I would hardly question its value out there, but I indeed do have lots of things hung up. So, he goes to pawn the stuff off, and he realizes that there's this 50,000 reward for information about all the kids that are missing. And for for James, right? He's more concerned with the reward than the kids, which I mean, kind of just goes to show you the character that he is. But he ends up going to the police office, or he goes to the police station to kind of explain what's happening. And wouldn't you know it, that Paul is coming out at the same time. So Paul gives chase. He eventually catches James. James shows him the house. Paul walks into the house, and there's this hours had to go by, right? Because it looked like it was kind of like, I don't know, like maybe midday or a little bit later, where James goes to the house, and then it's nighttime when we cut back to James, who's out there in the police car still, and you see Paul come up, and he's just acting all crazy, and he drags him into the house. But yeah, like, to me, these two stories, well, I know it does move the whole thing along, I just didn't feel like it was super critical, and I felt like you could have maybe had them stumble upon the house a different way that didn't involve you kind of introducing these two characters that had really very little significance on the overall story. So,
I don't know.
Well,
I mean, we really didn't need to know that Paul and Justine hooked up again, and it led to a confrontation between Paul's wife and Justine in the liquor store.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there was a whole lot of things that stem from that, and it's just like, I don't really know if this is helping us get towards what you're trying to show for the story. But it does kind of give you some brevity, and I think it does give you an opportunity to kind of experience more about what's happening. But I think the payoff wasn't as strong as I would have liked. So I think this is probably the weakest part of the story for me, at least, was kind of watching through Paul and James segments. So, but after we get James the Junkie's story, now we move over to Marcus's story, right? And this is where, because we know Marcus totally lost his mind and was attacking Justine, like, this was the moment where it's like, okay, shit's about to hit the fan, right? So we see Marcus, and he's trying to meet with Alex's parents to kind of discuss what Justine had seen before, right? He's, I would say, a caring principal that wants to help him out. And this is where we first get to meet Aunt Gladys. So thinking about what we've seen so far in the movie, how was it being introduced to Gladys? What was your first impression of her?
I mean, the way she looked, right? I mean, it was quite obvious that there's something wrong with this woman, right?
Yes.
Because I mean, a woman of that age, they would try to make themselves look a little bit more normal. And I'm not trying to be sexist or anything, but I'm just saying, like, it's because we'll be doing a review of The Substance next week. I mean, there's some eerie parallels between what we see with Gladys and what we see with Elizabeth Sparkle, like later on in the movie. They look like, holy shit, they look like they've aged like 100 years. And I was just thinking, like, I don't know if they did this on purpose or not, but they just made her look so clownish and yet so disturbing.
I know, right?
So it's like, if I saw a woman like that walk in, I would automatically, have my, blinders up and my red flags, just screaming. I'm like, yeah, this woman, yeah, this woman's bad news bears. Like she looks like someone who doesn't have her shit together,
Oh, absolutely, right. And I think it's fair to say when she walked into the room, I'm like, okay, she did something, right? Like you don't know what it is, but the way she looks is just like she has some important part to it, right? I think that this is where the mystery it kind of lets out from the story a little bit, right? Because it's like, oh geez, this character is so blatant. I think it was very jarring to have her walk in because I'm like, oh my gosh, she like totally steals the show almost halfway through, right? I mean, this is a character that technically we did see, right? And I think this is what I liked about the repeat showings because she actually was on the couch with Alex and Alex's father during the interviews at the beginning that we saw. We just didn't know her character, why she was there. We just saw her red hair. So I thought that was very interesting on repeat viewings. You actually see her there, but this is the first time we're actually kind of see her, right? I know we technically saw her a little bit in James's story because like she's just kind of out there in the forest for some reason, but this is our first true time to meet Gladys.
So let me ask you this: did
Yeah.
you have an issue with the way that Gladys was presented? Because I felt like that's kind of where the movie kind of went off the rails a little bit. I was like, because they were pretty subtle throughout the entire movie, and then you have this woman who's garishly decorated like the Whore of Babylon, and you're thinking, wow, like, mate, come on, you were doing so well up until this point. Like, if you had made her look like a normal, I don't know, octogenarian or whatever she is, I mean, we wouldn't be any wiser. But as soon as she walked in looking like, Mrs. Ronald McDonald, it's like, well, all bets are off at this point.
Yeah, the movie absolutely lost all subtlety there, right? And I think it's interesting, right? Because we went through kind of this like mystery type of thing to understanding more about Gladys and how she's kind of pulling the strings with everything. And it just felt like a tonal shift in what they want to tell with the story. And I thought, like I said, it was a very interesting decision, right? Because Gladys is not the least bit subtle with how she looks at everything. Like, as you said, right? She is bad news bears. So it definitely, they definitely got rid of any subtlety or any questions that you had about it, because as soon as Gladys pops up, that she's going to play a part in this.
And it's such a shame too, because it's like, well, if they kept up that theme and made that reveal at the end, it would have been far more. Yes. I said it would have been a far more better payoff, but they did what they did, and I mean, there's really nothing else we can say. But I felt like they should have kept up the facade of subtlety.
Yes, no, I agree. I think that the tone shift, I think it's going to hit people very differently, right? Because I think for me, I like the mystery, and I would have liked that to be kept up till the end. But I could also see the audience being like, "Oh my gosh, like this is the clear villain. I can't wait to learn more about her and how she's doing everything." So I think you'll have two very distinct camps there with how they, I guess, how they enjoy Gladys coming into the film. And really, Gladys doesn't waste much time with kind of getting about her business, right? Because she goes to Marcus's house directly, and we actually see her use her powers, right? And I like how the movie doesn't really like explain to you how the powers work. Everything is just done visually, right? So she's got like this, stick with like a thorn on it. She's got a bleed on it. She has to have an object from one of the people, and it's just I think did a very good job of explaining how the powers work, right? Other than, obviously witchcraft is all out there, but we could see how the powers work in this world. And I think they did a very good job of doing it, because you see her meet Marcus and she's asking for all these weird things, like, can I have a bowl of water? And you see she's able to control Marcus, and she has Marcus kill his lover, right? Spouse. I don't think they ever really mentioned it, but he ends up killing his lover And once he does that, you see that Gladys, she like breaks the stick, right? And this kind of breaks the curse. And then what she does is she ends up pulling out this lock of hair, and she ties it, and she sends Marcus out on Justine, right? And this is once again, I think, how they do such an effective job of storytelling, because this locket of hair is the locket of hair that Alice's mom cut off Justine, 30, 40 minutes ago in the film. So now we see why that was cut off and how it has a payoff later in the story, because now he's chasing after, or Marcus is chasing after Justine to try to kill her. Unfortunately for Marcus, he's kind of gets beat up a lot by Archer, and then as he's running through the streets, a car just plows right into him, and that is the unfortunate end of Marcus. And I have to admit, like, I was really bummed because, like I said earlier, Marcus was such a likable person. He seemed to genuinely care about everyone that was out there. So to see him kind of be where our story kind of takes this more gruesome turn was, I think, very surprising. So yeah, that was Marcus. So what do you think about just some of the visual storytelling that we got as we got to learn more about Gladys and how she is operating?
Well, I was going to say for Marcus, it's Game of Thrones rules, right? Nobody's safe. But I would also say with Gladys, because and I'll mention this later on. A lot of what Gladys does is it kind of fits in with what we know about witchcraft, right? And that stick that she carries, that thorn stick she carries, it's very similar to what we read in fairy tales and mythologies about witches having wands and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a pretty unique way of having a wand that she kind of, I would say it's like a single use wand. You break it and then you move on to the next one. But what we see here with what Gladys is doing, the stick that she uses is very similar to what some worshippers of Dionysus would use, which is called a thyrsus. And it's basically a stick that they carry with them, and they usually wrap, like, well, in this case, they wrap vines around it, and they carry it with them, and they use it for different purposes. So what we'll see later on kind of again ties in with Greek mythology, where where the followers of Dionysus, they're enchanted. They kind of do all these crazy things, and they don't know why they're doing it. They're just doing it because they've been put. Well, in this case, they're put under the spell of the gods. But in this case, it's the spell of a witch.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was the big thing that kind of came to mind as I was watching Gladys's scenes. Apart from the fact that she looks pretty garish in that makeup.
Yes. Yeah. I feel like it's like if you're trying to, I guess if you're like a witch that's doing all this stuff, like maybe having a better disguise would suit you better than looking like that, because you stick out like a sore thumb and you get everyone's attention. Whereas if you were more, I would say, normal, right? You would probably not get as much attention, and maybe you would be able to do more with whatever you're trying to do. Just my 2 cents on how to be a better witch.
I mean, and she is played by Ed Harris's wife too, and she's a pretty a good looking woman. So I was like, if you just have her like look as she does today, then like you said, no one be any wiser. She can just go about doing whatever she's doing without drawing anyone's suspicion. I even made a joke as I was watching. I was like, well, the only other way they could make this obvious is if she wore like a black gown with a witch's hat, like. That's the only other way you can make it more obvious. Like there's something weird going on with her.
Yeah, like we needed any less subtlety, right? So, but yeah, after Marcus's death, we move into our final chapter, right? Which is we focus on Alex, right? The little boy that is the only one that didn't get control, right? And we start to learn a little bit more about Alex's backstory and everything that happened. So we find out that Gladys is actually his mom's sister, so it's Alex's aunt. And they haven't seen her, right, this aunt, in 15 years, right? Now, now look, right? I I don't know about everybody else, right? And I understand that she's family, right? But I don't know if I would take a sickly person in that I haven't seen in 15 years um into my house, right? I don't know. That's just me, right? What about you, Luca? Am I crazy for feeling like God, they really put themselves out there on someone that is, I mean, practically a stranger, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was a bit confused because I didn't know if she really was his aunt or she kind of just,
Yes.
enchanted her way into making them think
Yes.
she was family.
Exactly, right. And that was something I was thinking about the whole time too. And I mean, I don't think we ever really got a good explanation of that, right? I did think that because of the way she looks, that they couldn't tell if that was really the aunt or not, right? So that actually is an excellent point. It did make me question whether or not that was the aunt, or someone that was just, because of the way she looks and because she was super sick, that they're just like, oh, well, I mean, this person's, I mean, they can't possibly be lying about their identity. This is probably her, even if I don't recognize her. So they did add a different layer of confusion when I was watching that part. But yeah, so Gladys comes in, right? Alex is going to school as normal. And then as he returns from school one day, he finds his parents in kind of this, I'll say, like, I don't know, stupefied state, catatonic state, right? They're clearly not themselves. Gladys kind of confronts Alex as like, hey, you can't tell anybody about what's going on with your parents, right? And we see Gladys, she shows off her powers again, because she, does the little witchcraft thingy, and the parents take up these forks and just start stabbing themselves in the face. And I was just like, oh my God, this is so brutal to watch, because they're just sitting there like just stabbing themselves, being totally unrelenting. And, I think that just shows for me how much Alex is having to go through, right? Because I think we see a lot of these films, or at least I'll say, I see a lot of these films where it's like character motivations tend to be really weird to me, where it's like, why didn't you just do this? Or you could have just done then that, and you would have been okay. In this, I think they do a great job of showing, like, hey, Alex does have to really just shut up and not say anything, because Gladys has his parents at home, and she could very easily kill them. So I really enjoyed the tension that they build up by showing all that, because it does show how much Alex is having to suffer through, and how him opening his mouth is going to lead to his parents being killed. So I thought that was great.
Here's the thing that kind of confuses me, right?
Okay.
Because Gladys makes makes it a point to say, do not tell anybody about me. I don't want you running around telling people about me, or else your parents will get it. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, nobody in this town knows who you are, lady.
Oh, that's true.
It's like it's like if you went and said, "Oh, my Aunt Gladys is here," everybody would be like, "Oh, that's nice. You've got family over." Okay, and like, so I'm a little confused as to why she's so emphatic about Alex not telling people, about her, because one, no one knows who she is, and two, if he did mention her, I mean, most people would, they wouldn't have a negative reaction, because it's not like Aunt Gladys has been going around like doing this shit, and there's documentation that she's going around enchanting people.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was a bit weird that that's the first thing she goes to.
Yeah, especially because if you think about Alex, right, he's gonna be like, well, what's Aunt Gladys doing? Oh, well, she controls my parents, and she's having them stab themselves in the face with a fork, right? Like, everyone's gonna be like, well, okay, that's obviously a lie. So his story is so outlandish, it's almost like, people would not think twice about it and just be like, I don't know, this is a kid with a really freaky imagination.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess Gladys, she's ill, right? So she's been very sick, and she needs, I don't know, I guess more something, right? I don't think they really explained why her doing what she was doing was going to help her, but
she's draining the life force out of younger people. That's why she needs those kids.
Okay, that That makes more sense. Thank you. I should have picked up on that, and that's kind of what I thought I was going for. I didn't remember that they like kind of showed off anything with that. So, but thank you.
There's something I do want to add because I remember reading about this a while back. Back in the Middle Ages, there was this thing. There's this belief where if you were sick, right, if you drank like the blood or imbibed like the body parts of a younger person, it would extend your own life. So one of the big things that people used to do back in the day was when there was a public execution, right? So let's say, for instance, if the guy who was executed was like in his 20s, right, and you were in your 60s and you were sick, the idea was to basically get the blood and get the body parts from the executed person and then mash them up and turn them into some sort of intinction where you would drink it.
Oh,
And the idea was it was a very interesting documentary that I watched too. The idea was that if you imbibed their body parts, so let's say like that executed criminal had like another 60 years, 40 years to go in his life, right? So he was executed at 20 years old. He could have lived to 60. The idea was that if you imbibed, his life force, then the years he could have lived would have been transferred over to you. So if you were 60, theoretically you could have lived to 100 years old because the 40 years he could have lived were taken away from him, but now it gets transferred over to you. So then you get to live out the 40 years he could have lived. I mean, it's total bogus science, but
of course.
but that's what they believed from the Middle Ages, surprisingly up until the Revolutionary period. And after that, everybody was like, the authorities were like, yeah, we're going to put a stop to this right now. This is getting pretty out of hand. But there were even moments where people would actually cut off parts of body parts from an executed criminal. So again, so let's say, for instance, you had like if you had like warts or hemorrhoids or whatever, right? The idea was if you, let's say you chopped off like the hand of an executed criminal, and you basically rubbed that hand over the affected body part, right? The idea was like the disease would transfer from you over to the dead guy's hand, and then you would take the dead person's hand and then bury it somewhere. So then you get cured, but then the executed criminal, well, he's shit out of luck because now he's got hemorrhoids and he's got to deal with it, whether he wants to or not. So that's a little bit of that whole mentality going on there. They're really digging deep into the past to kind of play into it. The idea that for someone who is sick or dying, all you got to do is just absorb the life force of someone else in order to extend your own life. And I was watching a documentary the other day about Elizabeth Bathory, who was a Hungarian countess from the 16th century, who actually killed a lot of her female servants by draining them of their blood and taking a bath in their blood, so she could extend her lifespan as a result. Didn't work because she got caught, and then she ended up getting walled in her own castle, and she ended up dying a few years later. But the reason why I mention this is because the writers and the directors of this movie are definitely looking back to these infamous cases of magic from way back in the day to kind of make the story a little bit more surreal as it was, because just like when we did a review of Sinners last week, we were talking about magical realism, where we're talking about a world where everything feels grounded. We can believe that these events take place, but then you introduce this one supernatural element to it. We're getting the same thing here with weapons, except instead of vampires, we're talking about witches. So.
Yep. So, by the way, how many more years do you think you're gonna live, Luka?
With the rate I'm going, I'm probably signing off in 30 something years. I mean,
30 years. Okay, that's not too bad. Okay, I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah.
All right.
So in which case, you probably might want to put an ad out for a new producer at some point. So.
All right. So, okay, wait a minute. So, let's let's talk about Gladys, right? She kind of is not able to get younger at maybe the rate she wants to get. So she ends up coming up with this plan that, Alex needs to collect the items from all the kids in this class. This way, she can use them to become younger. And I kind of like how Alex's reaction is to this, because while he probably doesn't truly grasp everything that's happening, he understands that if Gladys gets what she wants, then she will let him and his parents go. And I can appreciate this very like childlike idea of how he's trying to resolve his issue, and how by him following through on this is how he's going to kind of protect his parents and protect himself from everything that's going to happen.
Yeah, but you just feel so bad for the kid too, because it's like he's in such. He's in a really really bad position, and what really kind of made me, I wouldn't say pissed off, but it kind of rubbed me the wrong way, was the fact that he's going to the store, he's like getting all these cans of soup and he's feeding his parents, and I'm just sitting there, I'm thinking like, this kid, he should be out, riding bikes and playing with his friends. He shouldn't be playing caretaker to two adults and 17 something kids in his basement. That's gonna scar him for life.
Yeah, no, of course, right? Because like he ends up doing this, and he brings all the cards in that has all the names on it, and she does the little spell, and then we see all the kids running to the house. So now we know what happened with the kids. They were summoned there by a witch. And it's funny you mentioned the soup, right? Because like that's how he initially feeds his parents, and then now he's stuck there like feeding soup to all these kids and his parents. I'm like, damn, this kid just got rough. And it's like, why is soup the go-to for something like this, right? Like it was just funny to think about, because it's like soup is messy, right? Like, I got facial hair, right? So soup gets in there. It's slopping all over the place, and it's just like, damn. I feel bad for him, because you gotta have so much more cleanup dealing with soup.
Think about it, but Lee, think about it though. I mean, at that age, like, your parents are going to say, they're not going to go to a 6-year-old Lee Suchek and say, Lee, I want you to make a filet mignon with some roasted vegetables tonight.
Oh,
I think that'd be really good. At 6-year-old, at 6 years old, like, probably the easiest thing to open and eat is going to be soup, or in my case, it was going to be Chef Boyardee, right? Like that's there really isn't much that you can do at that age. And I think Gladys, has the wherewithal to know that, hey, this kid's not going to be able to do much, so you might as well just have him buy soup, because unless you're really nitpicky, you can open up a can of Campbell's soup and just eat it straight out of the can, right? Same with Chef Boyardee. You can open up the these food items and just eat them right out of the can, and and that's pretty much it. You're pretty much set for the day or the night in this case.
Yeah, no, it's very fair. It was just something funny. I'm like, God, this kid's got to sit there. He's got to not only clean up his parents, but clean up all these kids. He's feeding them soup that's not well known for being a very clean meal, especially when you're feeding all these people this. So
and they're pretty stiff also. So
yes,
it's like you gotta,
they're not helping them a lot with this.
You gotta wrench open their mouth, and then and then you kind of have to force feed. My thing. So as I'm watching it, I'm like, well, it would be a lot easier if they had like a feeding tube or something, kind of like that funnel that college kids used to drink beer out of. I thought that would have been a much easier system.
Yeah, he should have just tilted their heads back, and then you could just like kind of throw the soup in there, right? That would have been easier. Come on, Alex. Throw those kids' heads back, so this way we get the soup funnel in. We kind of get, I guess, like we see more of kind of like Alex going through his day to day. Eventually, he comes home. And this is where we see Paul and James again, right? So Paul being the police officer, James the junkie, and we see that they've been pretty much they're now under the control of the witch, right? Under the control of Gladys. So this kind of clarifies what happened to them, even though it was heavily implied. Now we physically see it, and we see Paul kind of in his, I guess, witch-controlled state. He waves out, to these vehicles, and we see Justine and Archer, who were driving here earlier, because this is where all the kids were converging. So they're at Alex's house now, and he motions them to come in, and this is where we kind of get this, I guess, fight sequence, right? Where Justine is fighting against Paul, and Archer is fighting against James. Eventually, Justine gets the upper hand after using a potato peeler on Paul's face. I don't know if that was maybe the path I would have gone, but definitely gives a pretty wild visual of a guy getting his face peeled off, literally.
Yeah.
But Justine manages to get Paul's gun, shoots him in the neck, but that doesn't really stop him, so she decides to put it up to his head, shoots him in the head, kills him, and she goes and she actually helps save Archer, who was being attacked by James at the time, and also shoots James. So then they are able to get rid of the two people coming in. So you see Archer goes down into the basement, and all the kids are down there. He's looking for his kid, but then who's down there? Good old Gladys, right? Hiding in the basement. So we see Archer ends up getting, I think, like a necklace or something that she took off, and she ends up using that to control Archer. Archer goes ahead and starts attacking Justine. And all the while, right, our true hero of this, right, is Alex, right? Because Alex is dealing with his parents, who are constantly putting their heads through broken doors. Like they're like, "Here's mommy," as a very obvious reference for that. But
to be fair, like he crossed the salt line, so
yes.
as soon as he did that, they just went to attack mode.
Yes, correct. So, but yeah. So, I like how Alex, because he's seen Gladys perform this ritual, he decides to do the ritual himself, and I thought that was super cool, right? Because it just shows that, like, I guess technically anyone could do this, or maybe that actually proves that because Gladys is a witch and he's related, that maybe he has witch powers. I don't know. I guess we could, that would be a debate for, what that means. But he's able to sick all the kids on Gladys. And this sequence, I thought, went maybe a little bit too long, right? I thought they maybe had a little bit too much fun with this, because Gladys is just like running through backyards and running through houses.
It was a pretty funny scene.
It is.
Because she's just basically being chased by a bunch of kids.
Yes. And the kids they're just jumping through windows and everything like that. It's totally over the top, but it is absolutely funny to see, right? So they're all just sitting there jumping around and doing all this. Eventually one of the kids catches up to Gladys, and then the kids, they just rip Gladys apart. Like, it is totally bloody. Like, they're just like ripping off arms, ripping off legs.
They rip her head off too. Yeah.
In essence, they just kind of like rip her head in half almost from the jaw, right? So they end up killing Gladys, right? This I guess kind of releases the curse, and that's how it ends. But I thought it was kind of interesting, right? So all these characters, right, once the curse is broken on them, they don't really return to them full selves, right? We do get this narration from the mystical kid character, right? The mystical narrator that may not be Alex, but probably not Alex, because they refer to Alex, and it would be weird if he was talking about himself in the third person. But you find out that the kids, some of them just started talking like a year later, but obviously they're not themselves still. And for Alex's parents, like the kid says that, oh, other people are giving them soup now. So it's kind of like not really a happy ending, right? Because really all the people that impacted, they didn't seem to really recover immediately or right away or at all, right? Because we don't really know how much that is. But that was that was the end for it. So I guess I will kind of give my final thoughts on Weapons, right, to kind of wrap this up. So I watched this twice. On the second showing, I started to enjoy it more than the first one. And that's actually not to say I liked it first. I liked it the first showing too, but the second time it was more fun to kind of see all the stuff that was happening, right? Because you start to notice, like, oh, you know, Gladys, that he was on the couch with him at the beginning that we didn't really see. Or Paul, you don't really or I'm sorry, for Archer, you don't really put together that, you know, he's the parent that's yelling at them, yelling at Justine and during the school conference and everything. So I think this is one of those films that has a really fun rewatch because you start to notice things that weren't really clear on the first showing. They make a lot more sense in that second viewing. And I think that is always a very cool thing for a movie to be able to do, is to be able to give you a good showing, but make it interesting to go back and rewatch it, right? And I don't, this could be a weird comparison, right? But I always think a lot about like the movie Inception, right? Where there's a lot of very interesting things that you see in that film. But when you rewatch it more than once, you start to understand more and more of the picture. And I think movies that have that nice replay value really do a good job with kind of keeping people interested, and will keep it as relevant as it can be as it moves forward. I thought that a lot of the acting was a ton of fun because people have this very, like, I would say, honest reaction to the madness that's going around them, right? Where someone's like, oh my gosh, what the fuck? Why is this person chasing me? Like, it feels very real. Like, I would totally believe someone would have that exact same reaction if this thing was happening in real life. That's another piece I enjoy. And like I said, I have to give a lot of credit to the director, to the writing, the storyboarding. Like, you have to really have a great foundation in place for how you want to do this, because there is so much kind of recap where you see the same story but from a different perspective, that if you don't have a very strong story already in place, it's going to feel more disjointed. So I give them a lot of credit for having something really strong there. I think kind of my only, I would guess, qualms I would have is, first one is, it does kind of feel a little bit on the longer side, right? It is over 2 hours. And I think that there were some story elements that I could have easily lived without. And I think that would have helped kind of cut down and make the movie a little bit more streamlined. The other thing is, I can totally appreciate that Gladys's, I guess, showing up in the film. I would imagine that to be polarizing depending on what you wanted to see. Because I think that there is a very strong mystery to this until you see Gladys for the first time, and then all mystery's out the door, right? It's obvious that she is the villain or has a very clear role in everything that happened. And I would imagine that for some people, they're like, oh, that's not what I liked. Or, hey, you might have been like, you know, Gladys was such a bizarre character that she made up for it in just being totally just crazy, even just by her appearance. Yeah, that's what I have to say. So, Luka, what we got for weapons here?
Did you give your score, by the way?
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me give this a score. I'll give it a 4 out of 5. As far as my final score goes. So 4 weapons that didn't actually appear or have any relevance to the story out of 5.
I'm gonna give it a 3.7 out of 5. I enjoyed it for what it was, but I just felt like by the time you got to the introduction of Gladys, I mean, you know, like you said, you know, all bets are off, because at that point it's like, well, clearly we know who the villain is. I mean, I mentioned it, you know, before, and I'll say it again. They could have been a bit more subtle in how Gladys looked, right?
Oh, absolutely.
If she looked like any other, I mean, if Amy Madigan just looked like she normally does, nobody would be any wiser. But what I do like is the fact that there's a lot of, at least on the filmmaker's part, there is a lot of understanding, a lot of callback to the ancient, you know, magical beliefs of the past, right? So I already mentioned the idea of people, you know, wanting to extend their life by absorbing the life forces of younger people in order to live a little bit longer. I will say that scene at the end where all the kids are tearing Gladys apart, it actually reminds me of a play by Euripides called the Bacchae. So so in the so just for general context,
We will
Dion
need that.
we all know who Dionysus is. He's the god of wine and revelry, but he's also known for being batshit crazy, and his followers are they basically reflect their god. They're also batshit crazy. They're called the Maenads. And the Maenads are known for doing extraordinary things when they get all riled up, and they do all these sorts of crazy things. So in the play, what happens is the king of Thebes basically says, I know what you guys are doing, you worshippers of Dionysus. You guys are crazy. I'm going to outlaw this because I don't want you people going around causing mayhem in the city. So Dionysus decides, I'm going to teach this guy a lesson. So I'm going to go ahead and set everything up. So he tricks the king of Thebes into dressing up as one of the Maenads and spying on them. But then he tips the Maenads off and says, hey, that person over there? He's not really one of you. Maybe you should go after him. And the Maenads, I wouldn't say they're enchanted, but they're possessed almost. They chase after him and they tear him apart. And to make it even stranger is the fact that the king's mother is one of the Maenads, and she takes her son's head and sticks it on a staff.
Oh,
and
lovely.
She parades it around. So that's what it reminded me of, because what we see in Weapons sort of takes a page out of the Bacchae, where we see a bunch of enchanted children going batshit crazy and just tearing people apart. And we see that happen with Marcus, when Marcus basically, once he's under Gladys's thrall, he kills his husband, and then he goes to attack Justine, and then he gets killed. He gets killed in a very messy way. But there's also that familial connection where the only way for Alex to save his friends and his family is to basically kill his aunt. As you mentioned before, he basically performs that ritual and turns the kids on Gladys, and they end up tearing her apart. Oddly enough, they tear her head off just like they do in the play. I mean, in terms of story, like it's well written. Personally, I think it was well researched. I think they're digging into the ancient beliefs of ancient Greece and medieval Europe in order to make the rituals a bit more fleshed out, a bit more realistic, right? What I will say though is that you didn't need to take 2 hours to tell a movie like this, because we've reviewed movies where they have stupendous stories and amazing actors and a great direction, and they didn't need 2.5 hours to tell that story. And we mentioned this before, but there are some point of views where we really didn't need to see it. Like the big one for me is Paul, because Paul really didn't add anything to the story apart from the fact that he's a philanderer and he basically fucked Justine, and then Justine gets her comeuppances later on in the movie.
Yep.
But
also kind of a bad cop, right?
yeah, because he does unplug the dash cam footage to basically wail on James, who I mean, let's face it, he's defenseless. Like he's drugged out of his mind. He's got no idea of what's going on half the time. I mean, do you really want to waste your time with that? But it is what it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my score. Do you have any final thoughts before signing off?
No, I'm just, like I said, I always appreciate you, Luka, for bringing in like a lot of this like very interesting things that obviously I would never think of. So I definitely appreciate that, because it's really cool to kind of hear how we see similarities to this in like areas that, when we decided we are going to talk about weapons, right? I definitely did not think that Greek mythology and stuff like that would pop up. So always appreciate a very interesting perspective on something that I would say, for at least myself, and I would imagine some people in the audience, probably have no familiarity with. So,
well, I will say this. I will say this though. So Pedro Pascal was almost cast in the role of Archer, right? So obviously Pedro Pascal gets cast in everything. Pedro Pascal had to pull out because he was doing a little movie called Fantastic Four: First Steps. So Josh Brolin stepped in to play Archer. So I personally think Josh Brolin brought a far more grittier, far more tougher
absolutely
character.
Yeah,
I think
that's a great call out, because I think he also was like an executive producer or something on it as well. So
yeah, and funny enough, Julia Garner was played the teacher Justine, and as we discussed a few weeks ago in our review, she was also the Silver Surfer in the Fantastic Four: First Steps.
Yeah.
So
Look at that. So well, I appreciate that. I want to thank everyone for watching us talk about weapons, and I'd love to hear, I guess, how people got into watching this, because it is something where if you watch the trailer, you don't know what to expect. And with the name like Weapons, I thought that there would be more of a connection to that, but it should have just been really called Witches instead. So, I'd be curious. Everyone can leave some comments as far as what you thought about everything, and I appreciate everyone for listening to us ramble. So thank you, everybody.